Tim, to the extent that people are concerned about inflation, people might want to maybe hear from Tim very quickly before we move on. Maybe you guys already talked about this, but what we're seeing right now is the core inflation rate is actually not a problem at all. And we've looked at it every which way. So if you guys are making plans, that is probably not something that you should be worried about. What is a specific concern in certain sectors is this move in energy prices. And even on energy, it's not utility, it's not electricity prices, it's going to be oil prices in particular. We actually think that we'll be able to ride out the Libya situation and it will stabilize. The food prices really has to do with weather, floods, drought, fires, heat. I think if you ask John, he would say it has to do with climate change. But I won't wade into those politics right now because we're here to talk about jobs. But I make that point only to suggest that the data that we're seeing right now, we're not seeing a broad-based inflation trend, but rather very specific sectoral trend. Tim, fair?
Yeah, I think that the basic problem in some sense is that monetary policy in the emerging economies is still very loose. They've been very slow to tighten after the crisis, and they're going to have to start to tighten policy. That'll take some of the steam out of this pressure on commodity prices because they're going to be growing a little bit more modest pace going forward. But that's going to have to happen if we're going to contain the risk of inflation getting more momentum globally, and that needs to happen. We can't, of course, control that, but that'll be an important part of doing this. The other thing that you might refer to, it's 2:30 now, I think I can say this, is that we're going to try to remind people, just thinking about oil, that we have substantial capacity across the major economies in the strategic reserves of the major economies to deploy those reserves in the event we were to face some particular risk of sustained supply disruption. And hopefully by reminding people of that and calling attention to the fact that there's a fair amount of excess capacity in OPEC, parts of OPEC now, hopefully that will make it less likely the market still starts to build in higher prices over time. Won't be perfect protection against that, against all circumstances, but it might help a little bit.